Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. It's time for this week's Know Your Foe episode. And joining me is Pete Smith, who covers the Browns for OBR now. Right, Pete?
Yeah, I'm at the Orange and Brown Report.
All right, fantastic. I like our friend Jake Burns, and who's on the show a lot, and it must be a lot of fun to work with him.
Yeah, we've obviously known each other for quite a while. We've always talked about different things we'd like to do, and now we have an opportunity to get down and do some of those things. Certainly in your realm of just more film, more talking X's and O's, theorizing what may happen and then evaluating what actually happened.
All right. Well, appreciate having you on here. And the Ravens play the Browns for the second time this year, of course, coming up on Sunday. I guess the biggest news, Deshaun Watson will be back. Last we thought we were going to see him the first week, and I guess he was a day of game decision, and DTR started instead, and that kind of was a big reason, I'd say, for the lopsided score.
Yeah, not a great debut for your career.
Talk a little bit about who Watson is this year. Now he's played very well in several games and had some difficulty early in the season. Where is he right now?
Well, I mean, at this point, they are hoping, or at least saying all the right things, that the shoulder injury is now behind him, that the rotator cuff is healed. Do we really believe that? Difficult to say. Certainly, the game against the Arizona Cardinals, at least from a sheer strength standpoint, gave you reason to believe, yes, we're in good shape. Now there are questions about sort of short and intermediate passes as far as that goes. But in general, he is, the offense has been built for him, save for certain changes they've had to make just with personnel around them and who they have and who they don't have at this point. So it's a little bit of a feeling out process more from his standpoint than the offense's, but it's just trying to get him as comfortable as possible and doing things that he likes to do. Kevin Stefanski's done a pretty good job in his history of getting the offense to a point where it helps to lift a quarterback.
And now, when you're talking about what you saw this last week, were there any issues with velocity, any issues with getting the ball deep at all, issues with accuracy? We're looking for something here.
Short and intermediate, there were some questions. Whether that was just a nerve/feel thing, difficult to say. Arm strength, no problem. He ripped that first 35-yard rope to Amari Cooper. He felt good. He finished the game with a 45-yard rope to Amari Cooper through double coverage. It was, one of the best balls the Browns have thrown this season. Mm-hmm. So at least from that standpoint, he looks great. Now it's about details and little things and some of that. And I think he looks better throwing deep right now than anything else.
Let's talk about the trade deadline for a minute, because the Browns were not perhaps active in the way you'd expect. I mean, I would have expected the Browns potentially still to be a team that was on the lookout for talent, given where they sit in the AFC, and their chance to make the playoffs seems to be pretty good right now. But they went out and they traded Donovan Peoples-Jones for a 6th-round pick, right? To the Lions?
Yes. So I had the opposite thought on how the Browns should approach this. I thought the Browns did what I expected them to do. And there are a number of reasons why. First, as far as Donovan Peoples-Jones goes, because of the quarterback just mess, he hadn't been able to do much. And the other part of that is not his fault. The part that was somewhat of his fault, he was just a miserable punt returner this year after being so good last year. Mm-hmm. But he was getting no targets. He was just running for exercise in a lot of those games. And he's an expiring contract. He was he was going to test free agency regardless. So I think the Browns in many ways thought, hey, we can get something for him. We've got this rookie we like in Cedric Tillman. We've got Marquise Goodwin, who we want to see on the field more because of the speed element he brings. And I think the return, frankly, sucked, but I also understand why it was so low. And Detroit obviously needs help with their receiving situation, so it made sense. But just in general of not being aggressive, I think at some point this season, the Browns, who obviously are low on draft assets in particular because of the Deshaun Watson trade, don't have assets to sort of give away. And you saw it right from the rip when they traded Josh Dobbs and a 7th to get a 5th-round pick. And they need assets. So in a season where you lost Jack Conklin week 1 for the season, you lost Nick Chubb week 2 for the season, you have – even if you're sitting there going, well, Deshaun Watson looked great against the Cardinals, which is a mixed bag in my opinion. He's been a giant question mark. How much more do you want to spend on a season where you're sitting there going, I don't know if we have this? And from the Browns front office standpoint, they're looking at this as an extended window, that they feel like they've got 3-4 years to be able to push this, as opposed to thinking, well, we've got to go all in. And then, the other aspect is you just look at the division. It's a nightmare. I mean, this is a brutal thing where the Bengals are in dead last, and they were in the AFC title game last year, and they're 5-4. It's a brutal slugfest for the Browns. So I think it made sense for them to sort of sit back and say, hey, do we really want to send what Washington was asking for, a 3rd-round pick for Jacoby Brissett to get maybe a couple games out of him, or maybe, nobody's giving away left tackles or some of these other positions. So it made no sense for them to really push the way some people were kind of hoping for.
Yeah, and that does make a lot of sense. A lot of people wanted the Ravens to make a move, obviously, and the Ravens have an enormous raft of free agents going at the end of this year. They are desperate to maintain draft capital for next year. I didn't think it was the right move there, but it's interesting because DPJ for a 6, that's incredible value. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, boy, that'd be a nice move for the Ravens to try and get over the hump this year in terms of it. But I doubt the Browns would have made that trade in division. Well,
you can't help but wonder if an AFC team came calling and offered maybe a little more, the Browns like, no, we're going to go ahead and send him home to Detroit. And again, he's going to be a free agent after the season. So that sort of opens up the options where maybe a team like the Ravens might call him up and piss a lot of Browns fans off if they go that route.
10.0 yards per target career prior to this year for Donovan Peoples-Jones, and a guy who they've only been a couple guys in Ravens history. I think there's been 5 now total that have ever averaged 10.0 or more in a season, let alone a career. So
the interesting thing about Donovan Peoples-Jones, if you track basically all of his big games or big moments, they're all against the Bengals. Mm-hmm. He has absolutely destroyed the Bengals. So that's another element of that. All
right. Well, let's move on a little bit and talk about the offensive line, its current state. Now, we know both tackles have had injury problem. What's the status of Jedrick Wills going into this game?
Yeah, so Jedrick Wills went down in a heap. They put an air cast on immediately, and everybody's thinking, oh, season's over. Incredibly, he only injured his MCL, PCL, and suffered bone bruises. He is on injured reserve. He's going to be out approximately 6 weeks. And that's frankly the good news version of what they thought was going to have happen. So he's out. Jack Conklin's been out. He's not coming back this season. So they've had James Hudson III is most likely going to be the left tackle this week and going forward, who's been sort of a swing tackle guy they've had for a few years. He was a defensive tackle in college initially at Michigan before transferring to Cincinnati to become an offensive tackle. They liked his aggressive nature, and they wanted to see if they can develop him. He's a pretty good run blocker. He's been more of a question mark as a pass protector. But he's been in the system for a long time. Bill Callahan's had a lot of chances to work with him. And on the other side, the very pleasant surprise has been the rookie DeJuan Jones stepping in as a 4th-round rookie. And it's one of those situations where the questions with him as a player had nothing to do with ability. He dominated 2 years at Ohio State as a right tackle. He's 21. Obviously, he's 374 pounds is estimated. God only knows. But he's got that enormous length. His arms reach forever. And he's just always been an excellent pass protector. His run blocking is bad. He has, for his size and everything, he has good straight line speed. He has good explosiveness, but he's a bookcase. It's difficult for him to sort of adjust quickly on defensive linemen who are trying to, fill a gap or whatever. So that's where he has a difficult time. But he's done largely what he did in college. He just protects the quarterback. His first start was against TJ Watt. He fared pretty well. And then if not for a miscommunication on a block, he completely shut down Nick Bosa from a pass rushing standpoint. Again, not a good run blocker. And there will be plays, and you may have watched them already, where he gives you nothing. And you're sitting there going, woof. But the name of the game is pass protection first and foremost, and he does that well.
Yeah, and it's always the most important thing for any lineman. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Bryant McKinney in terms of his size and length that he gives you, but kind of a huge monolith, obviously, of a player. In a lot of ways, the Ravens with Daniel Falele have a guy of similar size, and he's not nearly performed as well at the NFL level. He's been turnstile in terms of, a pass blocker. So I'd probably a little better run blocker, but, I'd much rather have the combination of a good pass blocker, questionable run blocker at tackle. Let's move on. The running backs, obviously, the Nick Chubb injury in a lot of ways defined the Browns season kind of early, and I think the defense has been holding the team together in a lot of ways since. But talk a little bit about how the Browns have adjusted at running back.
Yeah, so there's two parts to that. The part with Chubb is that he makes everybody else right, and the offensive linemen have come. Wyatt Teller has not been afraid to say as much, that he calls him the eraser, that he will erase mistakes and do those things. So it's been more onus on the offensive front. And then the combination with that is between having DeJuan Jones now out there and Jedrick Wills when he was playing, it was really difficult and has been really difficult to run outside zone. They don't really have the people for it. They still run it occasionally, which is annoying to watch, but they're not built for that. And one of the things they wanted to incorporate, and they're starting to use more, and I think since the bye week have gotten better at it, they're using more inside zone, they're using more split zone, and they're also, in addition to things that they've been doing, they've always been a big pin and pull counter power team with Bitonio and Teller leading the way, and they like Ethan Posick is having a nice season again for them. That they've got, those are their three guys that when they are playing well, those three guys are playing at a high level. So, and then as far as the actual backfield, Jerome Ford is talented, but wildly inconsistent. He will do things that at times you're sitting there very impressed with his quickness and his speed. And he has home run power in terms of he can break a big long run, but then he will do things like run the ball outside and then like try to go around a DB as opposed to going through them when he's 215 pounds and is shown to be, he has power. He has inconsistent decision making on when he trusts it. He's gotten a little bit better at finishing runs, but even at times still you're sitting there going, why isn't he going full force? Kareem Hunt is back despite everything. And he's certainly had a sort of fun season from his fan standpoint. He's criminally inefficient as a running back, but what he does is, you give him just a small amount of daylight and he will just slam forward with all of his might and get 3-4 yards. And he's been effective in that. And they've had obviously used that to effect on short yardage and goal line situation where he's sort of diminished overwhelming concerns about how often he's running into his own linemen or getting hit in the backfield. He doesn't have any speed at this point. He's all strength and heart and guts, which you give him credit for. But, there's a reason he was on the street available when the Browns picked him up. And then last but not least is Pierre Strong, who, I'm very intrigued by. They traded for him when roster cutdowns were happening to the Patriots in exchange for a developing tackle named Tyrone Wheatley Jr. Pierre Strong, South Dakota State running back in college, supremely athletic. Like he was outstanding in that. He was super productive, and you like the skill set. He's strong, but he's got good speed. He's good agility and all these things. And for whatever reason, the Patriots never used him. Obviously, they've got a good number of backs there. So they felt he was expendable despite being a recent 4th-round pick for them. And the Browns haven't used him a ton. He's largely a special teams player, but he especially compared to somebody like Kareem Hunt, the speed is apparent. He's very creative in how he runs. And if he's got daylight, he can punish you. So and even if you go back to this past week, I think he only had a couple carries. There's a theory going around that maybe the Browns are trying to hide him a little bit, that they're trying to save him a little bit from both the Ravens, and then they play the Steelers next week, that they don't want to give too much away. And I do think there's a little bit of credence, at least in terms of how they ran the ball against the Cardinals. It felt very vanilla. It felt very sort of we're not going to do too much this week because we sort of know what's coming. So it's, I think, still like the second best running game in the league this year, which you sort of look at the pieces parts and you're like, how is this happening? But they've gotten a lot better. I think the game that really stands out is what they were able to do against Seattle. Seattle had a really good run defense, and the Browns were able to just punch through. And obviously, the big question coming out of the game is why didn't they then run the ball again on that 3rd and 3 call that resulted in the insane interception off a guy's helmet? So there's a lot that sort of like doesn't work, and I think against a team, some of these better teams, it sort of reveals its weaknesses of not having Nick Chubb. But every so often, they've been able to surprise a little bit.
Strong is an interesting cat because he had a very high missed tackle rate in all the carries he's had in the NFL, which isn't too many, but he ran for 10 yards per carry last year with New England and in 10 carries. That's not a lot. But he's in this year, he's got 5 missed tackles in a relatively small number, 30 or so carries. We saw a lot of that from Keaton Mitchell in his game. We'll get to that, him on the defense, and talk to him a little bit about. But the other thing I noticed is Kareem Hunt only has 3 missed tackles for us the whole season.
Yeah, I mean,
what's going on?
I've described him as a shopping cart full of groceries and how he runs.
Oh, okay.
There's no, like I said, he's not going around anybody. He's going through people. And I give him credit for sort of embracing that part of himself. He's all, historically, even when he was a more athletic back and more dominant when he was, particularly his rookie year with the Chiefs. But his entire career, he's always run where his like arms and legs are just flying all over the place. It's complete contrast to Nick Chubb, who's so polished and clean, and all of his movement is very calculated in how he avoids taking big hits. Kareem Hunt is taking all of the hits. Mm-hmm. He's just accepting it and going through with it anyway. So no, if he's getting the ball, where he's going. Maybe he'll stick his foot in the ground and move a gap, but he's trying to find where he can just put his head down, get behind his shoulder pads, and just slam forward.
All right, great descriptive material here. I love this when you have you on the show, Pete. What are they still running mostly out of 11, or are they doing much with either fullback or 12 personnel? What are they doing?
So, in part, I'm curious to see if this is going to change with Deshaun Watson being more of the offense, but I don't suspect it's going to happen right away. They play with a lot of tight ends, and they like to use a fullback. And much like the Ravens, it's not a traditional fullback. They're using Nick Harris, who's their backup center. He just looks like a block. But he's quick. I mean, he's got decent speed. He was drafted to be a zone style center because he's mobile. He's quick off the ball, and it sort of works for him in a fullback context that he can redirect and get on guys quickly enough. And he's short enough that he's okay in terms of leverage and stuff where he can have success. There are times where you see and you're like, it can look bad, but they've been effective with it. And David Njoku is a tremendous run blocker, and they've got Jordan Akins and they've got Harrison Bryant. They played quite a bit this past week. And some of that is obviously as they adjust to now moving on from Donovan Peoples-Jones and then Marquise Goodwin. We'll see what his status is, but he's in the concussion protocol. I don't think he's going to play this week. So your choices at that point beyond the top guys of Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore are suddenly – and David Bell, we'll see what his status is. Do you play Cedric Tillman more, or are you going to lean into your tight ends? My suspicion is they're going to lean more into those tight ends, try to limit what the Ravens defense can do in certain terms of creativity with the variations of different calls they like to do. They've got a very creative defense, very creative defensive coordinator who's done a really good job. Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more big jumbo personnel, and then occasionally they'll try to mix it up and then suddenly widen everybody out.
The Ravens are actually a team that does very well versus 12 now because they've kind of embraced the notion of Kyle Hamilton as the slot. So when obviously when you do that against 12 personnel, he's a good fit to cover a tight end, but he's also a huge addition to run game defense when you put him up there. Not to mention he can give you things in the pass rush. And kind of the queen of the chessboard, the Derwin James of the Ravens defense that they can move around. So I think the Ravens will do pretty well versus 12 personnel teams the rest of the way. It doesn't necessarily mean the Browns, because the Browns are kind of special in terms of what they deliver. But I think that's it's probably a pretty decent matchup for the Ravens to have a 12 personnel team. How about other things about the offense and how it fits together, concepts or whatever that you've seen this year, maybe that you hadn't seen before?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, things that they've always liked to do, they love condensed formations. Whether it's tight ends or receivers, they love to create those angles for their blockers, receiving threats. The guys, you lose a little bit with shipping off Donovan Peoples-Jones, but like the Browns have one of the bigger groups of receivers just from a body type standpoint. Amari Cooper is like 6'2", 215. Cedric Tillman is a big kid at 6'2" or 6'1" or 6'2" and like 210, 215. David Bell is a big receiver, 6'2", somewhere in that neighborhood of 211 pounds or something like that. In addition to the fact that they have David Njoku, that they have Jordan Akins, that they have Harrison Bryant. So they really like to be able to try to limit the amount of gaps opponents can attack and also simultaneously press them on how they have to cover from that standpoint. So then it potentially gives you good angles on, being able to get Amari Cooper isolated on a one-on-one, because it's more difficult to sort of double him when you've got all these moving pieces parts. In general, they haven't done a ton differently this year in terms of their passing offense. Certainly Deshaun Watson wants to push the ball down the field more than anyone else they have. He's aggressive in that. He's always going to take shots, which does benefit this team because they need to create more space in general. And when they had PJ Walker in there was none. Teams would just sit back and basically say, okay, the run's not that big of a threat. We can at least contain it. We're going to tackle the pass. Deshaun Watson at least creates more field that you have to be responsible for. But they are big on crossing routes, mesh concepts, big on sail and post corners and those type of things. But I mean, the biggest change for them is some of the stuff, the inside zone and the split zone is something they have not done a ton. That has been added to the end of last year and more used effectively this year. And then the various play actions and RPOs they can do off of that. It's difficult to sort of really project how much of that they're going to go right into. Certainly RPOs and those type of concepts are something the Browns want to get into and want to get comfortable with. It's really just a question of how quickly is Deshaun going to be comfortable enough to sort of get right into that with everything else he's been dealing with, and how much do the Browns want to put him in a situation where, if he doesn't make the right read, or even if he does, he may get, Kyle Hamilton may fly right up and hit him in the chops. Do they really want to have a situation where now he's suddenly taking multiple hits in the game for somebody who already has a proclivity for taking on contact?
Yeah. Concussions, you mean, right? You're talking about it.
Well, concussion, but obviously just what he dealt with. I mean, he missed basically 6 weeks with a shoulder injury, and obviously it's a fluke injury. He got a pitcher's injury, but every time he takes a hit, everybody's sort of like wincing and looking through their fingers and going, "Please don't get hurt again."
Mm-hmm. That's we know the feeling with Lamar, yes. So that's a good one. How is Watson at this point in his career in terms of reacquiring the field after turn your back play action? Because it's something the Ravens really ran a lot less of until this year. They got Lamar more under center now and are running some of that. But I'm interested to see, in Watson's case, you're mentioning RPOs. A lot of those are run from a mesh concept. You're right when you're talking about a sidecar mesh RPO, I'm assuming, as opposed to a pistol mesh RPO also would be a possibility. But how often does he turn his back for play action, and how comfortable does he seem to be with it?
It's a Kevin Stefanski staple. I think Deshaun is getting more comfortable with it. I don't know if he loves it for this game necessarily, but it's something that it's been an adjustment for him, but he sort of also can sort of appreciate what it does for him.
Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and a brand new cash-out system gives you options to bet and win, all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay hit, cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boost, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie.
But ultimately, he's a guy who wants to see the field, much in the same way Lamar was.
Yeah.
If I can see it, then I can deal with it, as opposed to blind faith. Deshaun Watson is not a big blind faith guy. And I think one of the things you saw in the Arizona game, and I think this is largely just hasn't played a ton, is the feel, the speed of the game. He was sort of leaving clean pockets. And I think part of that was a function of I can't necessarily see what's going on my blind side, but if I roll out, I can see everything. Even if I'm wrong and maybe I'm putting myself in more danger, at least I can see it. And then I can deal with it how I want to deal with it, as opposed to going on faith. I think in some ways that's a little bit of their DNA as a quarterback, but I think Kevin Stefanski's trying to push his bounds a little bit. And I think he's receptive to a point.
All right. All right, well, let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. And I always like to start with, what do the Browns use as a difference between early downs and passing downs in terms of how they line up? So are they a committed nickel team still? I'm just asking, on third down, or do they bring in a dime back to replace the weak side linebacker? What do they try and do?
Yeah, I mean, so early in the year, they were pretty committed to just having JOK on the field as much as possible because of everything he can do. I think partly because of just maximizing his usage, and partly because JOK, maybe more than anyone on the team, if he's less than 100%, his effectiveness drops off more than anyone else. So they want to keep him healthy in some way. So I think week 1 through 8, he was on the field like 71% of the time. And I think it's more close to 52, I think, recently. So there is some personnel swapping in that regard. But I mean, when they play the Ravens, the personnel changes are more prescribed. Sione Takitaki is always a guy who's on the field against the Ravens, at least in years past. Because they had so many tight ends and they were so jumbo, and he's their biggest linebacker. He's a Sam backer who has a little experience in the mic. He's more used to being able to play with expected dirty work. Anthony Walker is going to be on the field in those same type of situations. You may see more Tony Fields this time around, who played in the second matchup of these two teams last year, in combination with JOK. They want to have fewer linebackers on the field in general, but again, that may just come down to how the Ravens play it. Traditionally, in previous years, you always think of the Ravens, you're going, well, we are going to have 3 linebackers on the field the whole game, because it's basically how it works. Whereas now, with the offense they have, it's a little bit more, I think, personnel driven based on what the Ravens are doing and how they're going to operate. Certainly, JOK is a wild card because, 1, he has a ton of speed, and 2, because of that speed, he is a good problem for the good matchup for the Browns against a player like Lamar Jackson. Defensive line wise, they're very specific. Yes, they will occasionally have some of their nickel guys in on early downs, but they have a pretty prescribed group that they're going to have on perceived rundowns. Jordan Elliott is going to be up in the middle with 93. Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith are going to be out there, depending on his status. Alex Wright could be in on those situations. And then when they get to more pass rushing, you're going to see the smaller groups. Zadarius Smith's going to kick inside. You're going to get Okoronkwo. You're going to get Maurice Hurst, who's been fantastic for the Browns this year. Mm-hmm. And then Myles Garrett's going to line up wherever he wants.
All right. It's certainly a scary pass rush group. JOK is one of the players who's always really scared me about the Browns playing the Ravens, in part because he's a guy who hurt Lamar in one game, but he's always been – the Browns and Bengals both have timed up their blitzes well, or timed up their spies triggering well. When Lamar leaves the pocket, they're out there as soon as he's trying to leave the pocket, and it creates all kinds of problems for him. And I really mean usually left or right, and most of the time it's going to be right with Lamar. They've just been able to stretch him out laterally because of some of the speed they have and being able to contain him. I've really felt like Lamar has not done enough against the Browns, certainly, but against other teams as well. The Arizona Cardinals spied him intently, and he didn't have a very good game at all. I thought part of the problem was he wasn't trying to manipulate those spies, which I think you can do by either moving up in the pocket or feigning even a step right out of the pocket with players like JOK and some other teams who just are so trigger happy, wanting to come downhill on Lamar. But it's not really his game to I mean, definitely manipulates people in the open field like nobody, but in terms of manipulating spies into taking a rush on him, I haven't really seen that part of his game develop. I'd really like to see that in this game. All right. In terms of the pass rush, you talked a little bit about the scheme there. The defensive line, you talked a little bit about that group as well. Any big surprises on the defensive line this year? Anybody who was like just much better than you'd expected or much worse?
Maurice Hurst is the biggest surprise, given that he was basically injured for 2 years. It was certainly a talented player before that. Came in the NFL with the question about the heart condition and whether or not he was going to have a career at all. And then he outperformed and was good. And then he's come in and you're sort of like, okay, he's a flyer. We'll see how long it takes for him to get hurt. And he's been a dynamic pass rushing threat on the interior. He does exactly what you saw him do at Michigan in college, and then what he's been able to do in the NFL. He's quick. He's smart. He takes good angles. You saw the interception against the Seattle Seahawks, which is just a spectacular athletic play. Tips the ball up and then catches it himself at nearly 300 pounds. Not a lot of guys can do that. Nobody really has disappointed. I think the Browns want to see, I think it's safe to say the Browns want to see more from Zadarius Smith. He's a good player. The problem he runs into, and part of the problem that the Browns have, it's a problem, but it's also who they are. Jim Schwartz's defense, he says, the defensive line, you guys do what you want. And the linebackers and safeties will fix you. And the problem you've been running into with Zadarius Smith in particular is he gets caught in situations where he's trying to be responsible for backside cuts on runs and then gets just gouged when the quarterback rolls out to that side. And they've not done a good job of adjusting. Even if as the Browns only give 58 yards to the Cardinals, it was still driving me nuts that I'm sitting there screaming, he's rolling right. And they said nobody ever was there to stop him from rolling right. And that's the identity of who the Browns are. But the problem, and they play a ton of man coverage behind that. The problem is they can't do either of those things against the Ravens with any consistency. Like the Ravens do not allow you to be who the Browns want to be on defense. You cannot just say, okay, defensive line, you get to do whatever you want. Because if they do that, they're all, if they're wrong, Lamar Jackson's going to have 20 yards to run and the linebackers aren't going to be able to corral him. There are at least going to be some set of guidelines because he's just so special as an athlete where you have to be, if not gap sound, at least gap cognizant that you can't just sort of spin inside whenever you feel like, because you're going to get killed for it. And then, with that, the Browns are such a heavy man team, but you can't do that because you can't have your DBs turned around looking at the receiver with a quarterback like that, and it's death. So you're going to have to see, and I think deliberately, the Browns played a ton of zone against the Arizona Cardinals. I do not think that was because they were worried about Clayton Tune. Practice. I think that was entirely about getting ready for this matchup. So, and they have, and they needed it because they have not been good at zone this year, and they've gotten beat playing in zone. They are far more comfortable in man, and they have to be effective in that, in covering that way, or they're going to get beaten up. You look at the last matchup and the Ravens, if you look at the game, you go, oh, the Ravens blew them out. They did. That's absolutely right. But it really came down to 2 drives where you just 2 back-to-back drives where you're sitting there going, the Browns could not stop them. Lamar Jackson was operating at the peak of his powers. The play calling was fantastic. And the Browns just had no answers for them. And they just went right down the field. That was eye-opening. But the Browns, and maybe in some ways after that, the Ravens sort of took their foot off the gas and said, we just need to not screw up. And we don't want our quarterback to get hurt. That they didn't feel like they had to keep pushing it. But like that was sort of those 2 scoring drives. I think it was like 160 some total yards in those 2 drives were the crystallization of everything the Browns don't want to be against the Ravens and what the Ravens cause teams to do.
All right. Well, the Ravens are efficient in that game in terms of scoring on all 4 of their red zone drives, which is something they've been off and on this year. Really bad game in London, went 1 for 6 in the red zone, but that was a strength against Cleveland. Anything else about the deal? I don't think we hit on the secondary yet, did we? We haven't talked about them at all. Who's now lining up for the Browns in the secondary?
Yeah, so Denzel Ward is and Martin Emerson are their outside corners. It's a question mark who's going to play in the slot this week. Greg Newsome is dealing with, I believe, a groin injury that kept him out of the Arizona game. We'll find out his status. We're recording this basically right before teams are about to go out for practice and stuff. So we'll get an update on him because Cameron Mitchell, who's a 5th-round rookie who played really, really well against Arizona, is on injured reserve with a hamstring injury. So I would assume that if for whatever reason Newsome can't go, it'll probably be A.J. Green, the 3rd, certainly somebody the Ravens are familiar with. He's played in several of those games in the past. And then they've got Grant Delpit, who's playing really well at strong safety this year. And then Juan Thornhill, who's been a big, big, big plus for them at free safety this year. Again, very good man coverage team, has been far more inconsistent when it comes to some of their zone stuff and getting caught with some big coverage busts and those type of things. They have been good. But I think this entire Browns defense can basically be summarized as they are, when they feel like they're good, they're good. When they get worried, it tends to go bad, and they start giving up chunk plays. And you mentioned the red zone. Their red zone efficiency on defense is horrendous. They've been awful. You got a lot of sort of kudos for how well they played those first few games of the season. Nobody was ever in the red zone. It was easy. But like before the Cardinals game, they had that streak of 4 games. The Ravens were 4-4. And over that month, they were giving up touchdowns 81% of the time in the red zone. They were ghastly. So they are a team of sort of rhythm when things, and look, some of this is who they are. Jim Schwartz runs an attacking defense. They want to believe that if they get you behind, if one of those 3 plays goes negative, they're going to get you off the field. But you have to be able to, you're going to give up your share of plays because eventually teams are going to find a way to get you, but then you have to be able to get past it, move on to the next play, shows resilience. And they've struggled in that department this year in some ways. So what you see is like Seattle Seahawks game is another good example. They give up 17 points in the first quarter. They dominate the next basically 3 and 3/4 quarters, and then they have a lapse at the end. They just tend to be a very I say emotional team. I just think they're very confidence based. When they feel good, things are going good.
All right. Well, obviously some interesting things. You probably have seen the tape on Keaton Mitchell this week in terms of what he did in the first game against the Seahawks. In some ways, a very tired Seahawks team by the end, certainly when he had the 60-yard carry, but actually played a little bit in the first half as well. And I think there wasn't a lot of reason for the Seahawks to be tired at that point. Anything that comes to mind about what he might be able to do against the Browns or how the Browns might handle him better?
Well, here's what I would say about the Seahawks and the Cardinals, because it's interesting that the Browns played the Seahawks before the Ravens got him, and the Ravens played I think both those teams are cooked. in their respective games. I think they both played incredibly physical games. Arizona spent everything trying to upset the Ravens in the desert. The Seahawks obviously had to pull it out at the end. I think both those teams were just done. That's one of those schedule loss type things. Keaton Mitchell, look, whether it's what you've seen from him in the NFL or college, he's just one of those water bug type guys. He's tiny, but he's just super fast. You get him in space and he causes problems. And if the Browns get caught in a situation where he's left with open field, he's going to kill them in that regard, because again, they have sort of a risk-taking defense in that regard. And if you're right and you catch them in the wrong spot, he's going to have room to run, and that can be deadly. Flip side is when they are doing well and they're playing the gaps well, they're probably going to have a good time suffocating him. So I think it would not surprise me in the least if it's a lot of nothing plays for him. And then whether it's a run or it's a reception out of the backfield, that suddenly he creases one, and it's sort of, it may be one of those things where Ravens fans are watching and go, why do we keep giving him the ball? Why are we doing this? Okay, there he goes. There it goes for 50 yards or whatever it is. Yeah. It just strikes me as a feast or famine type player in this matchup.
Okay. All right. Interesting. The thing that shocked me the most about what he brought in that first game was the power. Contact balance was fantastic. I mean, I did not expect that from him. Certainly anything in college. The other thing, he made a really nice pass block, and that's been one of the things that's kept him off the field, or really, I think, kept him from being drafted, was just a complete non-factor as a pass blocker. Made a really nice pickup pass block on the left side to finish one off that looked pretty good. But the 8 missed tackles forced in 9 carries. A league leader has 33 right now to put that in perspective for people. And those are guys with 150 carries.
The other thing I would say with him, and one of the big things that stuck out to me in the first matchup, was the Ravens' run scheme was incredibly effective against what the Browns want to be. The Browns want to attack gaps. They want to shoot guys through. And the Ravens ran concepts, and their line did a really good job of being able to sort of allow their backs to have options and being patient and being able to sort of go, okay, this guy's crashing here. I can go out the back door. And that just killed them. The Browns would commit, and the Ravens were able to hold up long enough that their backs were able to find its space. And with a player like Keaton Mitchell, again, that potentially a deadly combination, that if he can find those things, if he's patient enough and the Ravens line continues to block as effectively as they did the first matchup, that really swings the advantage to the Ravens.
All right. Well, in this second matchup, I did want to ask you one more question about Emerson, just to go back for him for a second. Has he been in the slot then this year? I mean, he's huge, an atypical slot player, but I thought you mentioned him in the slot in this game.
No, he has played in the slot, but typically the Ravens don't have a guy that he's going to cover in the slot. I should say that's not necessarily true. They have had him, I believe, in the game last year, maybe even this first one, he has lined up against tight ends. He may have lined up against Mark Andrews at points, but traditionally he's a boundary corner. Like I said, if Greg Newsome can't go, they may put AJ Green there. Now, it's possible I could envision a scenario where they put AJ Green on the outside or somebody else on the outside, and maybe put Emerson in the middle in the slot for the sake of trying to throw something else at Mark Andrews, because they really do like Martin Emerson's physicality. He's not afraid. Will give up plays, but he's not. He is a guy who bounces back pretty quickly.
All right. And one more question about Grant Delpit too. Guy I really love coming out of school, but is he in his contract year now?
He is. He's having a fantastic season. Just does a lot of things. Does great work around the box. Has been good on the blitz. He's a very smart player. I think a combination of one. I mean, every Browns DB will say the same thing about what's the secret sauce to the defense. They'll say the defensive line undoubtedly has made the biggest change. But I think between the scheme and the addition of Juan Thornhill in particular has really allowed Jim Schwartz to use Delpit in the ways that you would have liked to see him from the beginning of his career. Granted, Delpit was at least coming out of free safety, and the Browns initially looked at him as free safety. He can do a little bit of that, but he's such a more dynamic player when he can play downhill and trust his instincts. And he is a guy I think the Browns will look to lock up if possible.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. The Browns, in terms of cap space, have about 20, 30 million. They have some significant amount of money this year, right? That they'll roll into next year.
Yes. So this is the thing: is the Browns will create as much money as possible in a year to roll over and essentially pay off extensions they keep paying. Andrew Berry's done a tremendous job of sort of planning way ahead. If you look at how the Browns have done this, it's basically since Sashi Brown was there, who's now with the Ravens, started in 2016. They spent 2 years with a drunken sailor, spending a lot of it before they got back on track. But they've been very good about planning ahead and trying to give themselves options in terms of how they want to be able to retain their own players, even as they're going to have to make some tough decisions at some other spots.
All right. Well, it'd be interesting. Obviously, a lot of Ravens fans are looking at the Browns cap and hoping that the Browns run into some trouble, because the Ravens have just an enormous number of free agents leaving after this year, and it's going to be very difficult for them to pay for. I mean, there's not going to really be money for additional cornerstone players, and they'll lose players like Geno Stone and Patrick Queen and Kevin Zeitler will almost certainly be gone. I'm missing some others, but who's the other big one? Anyway, lots of guys will not be playing for the Baltimore Ravens next year that are currently. So in a lot of ways, the window is a single year here for the Ravens. They will be able to rebuild, I think, and contend again in 25, but 24 is going to be very difficult for them.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on the Browns being poor anytime soon. They're really well positioned to keep going. It really just comes down to how they spend the money and if they can draft behind them. If they can do those things, they're going to be around for a while. If they fail at either of those things, then you could see this thing go poorly. And obviously, all of this is overshadowed by one single player. It goes as far as Watson takes them. And if he's not good, it's going to be a disaster. If he plays to the level of a $230 million player, they're going to be in really good shape.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about we go to the final usual question? Give me a player on each side of the ball that you think matches up well against the Ravens for this game.
Yeah. So offensively, Amari Cooper, because he's basically matched up against everyone well this year. The Ravens, when Marlon Humphrey was out with the foot, I think it was easy to say that they had the worst corners in the division. Marlon Humphrey back, certainly a sensational talent. That will be a matchup. I'm sure they're going to at least have him there most of the time. I think a lot of this game for the Browns is going to be finding ways to get Amari Cooper away from him, or finding ways to get him in spots that enable him to create space, because he's just been a sensational player for them. They've had nothing at quarterback for the season. I think he's already over 700 receiving yards for the year. So in a lot of ways, he's the offense. Defensively, it'll be interesting to see how this works. I think most people would look at JOK. I look at Grant Delpit in this one because of everything he's doing now, and because I think the Ravens are going to be hyper-focused on JOK for all the reasons we've sort of talked about. I think Grant Delpit, whether it's blitzing or just underneath coverage or some of the ways he can help be a good defender and a good tackler, can be a really good player for them. And he was sensational last year in the matchup. Obviously, it was with Tyler Huntley, but he really did a great job in coverage on Mark Andrews the last time they played. So he's got a good trend going.
There's an SAT question in there somewhere. PJ Walker is to the Browns as Tyler Huntley is to a guy who creates negative space for an offense to operate if ever there was one. So anyway, Pete, fantastic stuff. Always great to hear you, have you come on and talk Browns. Thanks for dropping all the knowledge on us. Tell the folks where they can find your stuff and talk football with you online if they want to, maybe on Twitter.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at _Pete Smith _. You can find my work at the Orange and Brown Report, the OBR. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Any piece you've written recently that is a kind of a one you're proud of that people should look for?
Most recently, with the injury to Jedrick Wills, I talked about what the present looks like for the offensive line and what the future is, because they have a lot of big decisions to make. We talk about cap dollars is where it comes in. They're estimated. My math or our math is they have $64 million in offense, just those 5 offensive linemen next year. They're not going to pay all 5.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Some decisions to be made. Well, thanks a lot, Pete. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. They're always open. I'm always interested in new topics and meeting new people to talk football with. Please get to me. I'll get back to you very quickly, and we'll see if there's an idea for a show there. Pete, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, as always.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.